There is a moment that almost no one remembers, but that everyone has lived through. You are sitting somewhere. It could be your kitchen, it could be the seat of a train, it could be the edge of your bed at 2 a.m. And suddenly, without anyone asking you, without there being a specific reason, a voice inside you says something that makes no practical sense. It is not a useful thought. It is not a solution to any problem. It is rather a naked question that slips in among the other thoughts as if it had always been there and only now had found a gap to come out. And the question is this: what if I am not who I think I am? Don't be afraid. Not yet. Stay in that kitchen, on that train, on that edge of the bed. Look around you. Everything looks normal. The coffee is steaming. The phone is flashing. There is background noise, perhaps a television that no one is watching, perhaps the sound of another person sleeping in the room next door. Everything seems in order, and yet that question is still there, throbbing, like an eye you cannot close. Most people, at that exact moment, do the most human thing in the world. They pick up their phone, they open an app, they distract themselves, and the question sinks back to the bottom, where all the things we know but pretend not to know live. You, however, are here, which is already rare, which already says something. So we are going to talk about what no one has told you about the mind. Not the mind you study in textbooks, that pink and wet thing that fires electrical signals. I am talking about the other one, the one that constructs the world you see before you see it, the one that decides what is real before you have time to check it, the one that wears your face but which, deep down, has never asked your permission to do anything. There is an image I want you to keep in mind for the duration of this journey. Imagine a theater, an old theater, the kind with worn red velvet seats and a crystal chandelier that hasn't been cleaned in decades. The stage has curtains. Many curtains, one behind the other, and you have spent your whole life believing that what is happening on the stage is reality, the real drama, the true story. But no one has told you how many curtains there are, and no one has told you what is behind the last one. That is what we are going to do today: lift curtains. The first one is the most obvious, and that is why it is the most dangerous. It is the curtain that bears the name of your thoughts. You believe your thoughts are yours. You believe that when something forms in your head, you have formed it, that you are the author, that you are the origin. But stop for a second and try something that no one has ever honestly asked you to try. Try not to think, not in a relaxed, meditative sense. Truly, close your eyes right now and try to completely stop the flow of thoughts for 30 seconds. Just 30. You can't. No one can, at least not without years of practice and an inner silence that most of us never achieve. Thoughts arrive on their own. They invade you. They form before you decide to form them. And this has an implication that very few people dare to take to its logical conclusion. If thoughts arrive without you generating them, who generates them? Who is talking in your head when you think it's you? This is where the theater becomes disturbing. There is a voice. You already know which one. The one that tells you that you are not enough. The one that remembers exactly the most hurtful sentence someone said to you 15 years ago and reproduces it with perfect fidelity just as you are about to fall asleep. The one that convinces you that if you speak, they will judge you, that if you act, you will fail, that if you show yourself, they will reject you. That voice is not your declared enemy. It doesn't wear a black cape or a wicked laugh. It speaks with your own voice. It knows your fears with surgical precision because it has built them itself, brick by brick, since childhood. And here comes the part that hurts more than anything else you might hear today. That voice does not just inhabit your mind. It has built your entire life around itself. The people you choose, the job you accept, the conversations you avoid, the words you swallow, the dreams you keep in locked drawers telling yourself that the time will come. All of that has the fingerprints of that voice. Not yours, its. We lift the second curtain. Behind the thoughts, there is something darker and more interesting. There is an invisible architecture that determines what thoughts are possible for you before they even appear. Imagine your mind is a city that someone designed before you were born. The streets go where they go. Some neighborhoods have an exit, and others are closed labyrinths. You can move through that city with total freedom, believing you choose your route, without realizing that the entire city was designed so that you never reach certain places. Those places you cannot visit are your psychic forbidden zones. They are not secrets that someone is hiding. They are absences, blank spaces on your mental map where a path simply does not exist. You do not think about certain possibilities not because you have discarded them, but because they literally do not exist in your inner architecture. How many times have you heard someone say, "I am not that kind of person," as if it were an objective description of reality and not the most powerful of cages? How many times have you said it yourself? "I am not the type to take risks. I am not the type to ask. I am not the type to trust easily." Every one of those phrases is a wall that at some point in the past was built for a very valid reason, no doubt. Because there was pain, because there was betrayal, because there was a wound that needed protection. But walls do not distinguish between the danger that has passed and the world that is waiting on the other side. And yet they stand, and you call them personality. There is something darkly amusing to me in this, with that kind of humor that only appears when you look at the human condition from enough distance to see both the tragic and the absurd at the same time. We spend years cultivating our identity with absolute care and dedication. We choose clothes that say who we are, opinions that define us, groups to belong to, narratives about our past that explain our present. And that entire building, that entire work of personal construction that has cost so much effort, is raised on the foundations of what once hurt us enough to change the way we see the world. We are, for the most part, the scar of something that no one should have had to live through, but that somehow shaped everything that came after. And we call it character. We call it identity. Sometimes, with a curious mix of pride and melancholy, we call it personal history. We lift the third curtain. This one smells different, older. There is something that does not belong entirely to the individual. A layer of the mind that does not begin or end in you but extends backward in time toward those who came before and sideways into the people around you without you being aware of it. You can call it many things. You can call it the collective unconscious. You can call it the morphogenetic field. You can call it the voice of the ancestors. You can call it the weight of the lineage. The name does not matter as much as the experience. Have you ever repeated a pattern you swore you wouldn't repeat? Have you seen in yourself, with a shiver, a gesture, or a reaction of someone you didn't want to resemble? Have you had fears that have no root in your own experience? Fears that seem older than you? Fears that smell of another era? That is not a coincidence. And it is not magic in the sense that the word is used to divert attention. It is transmission. Information that travels not in genes but in behavioral patterns, in the stories that were told and those that were not, in the silences that are inherited just like eyes or the shape of hands. There is something called the debt of the unspoken. Families, communities, entire cultures carry within themselves traumas that no one named at the time because there was no vocabulary to do so, or because naming it would have been too dangerous, or simply because the pain was so great that the only way to move forward was to bury it and keep walking. And that buried pain does not disappear. It becomes an underground current flowing beneath the surface of generations, and, from time to time, it appears on the surface as an inexplicable symptom, a sadness without an object, a rage that cannot find its cause, a persistent feeling that there is something you must do but you don't know what, that there is something you must resolve but you don't know where the knot is. You are not alone in your head. You never have been. And now we come to the fourth curtain, the one that most people abandon before lifting it. We have spoken of the thoughts you do not control, of the architecture that limits what you can think, of the currents that come from further back than you. But there is one more layer, and it is the most dizzying of all, because it involves asking oneself something that the rational mind finds deeply uncomfortable. What is reality? Not in the abstract sense of academic philosophy. I am not interested in that parlor game. I am interested in something more concrete and more disconcerting. Every person on this planet lives in a different world, not metaphorically, literally. What you see when you look at another person is not what that person sees when they look in the mirror. What you interpret as a threat, another lives as an opportunity. What seems like a loss to you seems like a liberation to another, and both have proof. Both can point to reality and say, look, here it is, what I see is what is, and both are right from within their world. This means something that few people fully digest. Reality is not a fixed fact that we perceive with more or less accuracy. Reality is the result of a process of construction that is happening at all times, in your nervous system, in your mental maps, in your wounds and hopes and fears, and what comes out on the other side of that process is the world you see, not the world that exists. The world you can see given the system of perception you have at this moment, and now the burning question. If you can change the system of perception, do you change the world you see? The answer is yes, and that is exactly what makes this question so uncomfortable, because if the answer is yes, then much of what you call fate is actually a filter. Much of what you call bad luck is actually a pattern. Much of what you call the real world is actually the world your mind has agreed to see. And if that is true, then the question that follows is not, why are these things happening to me? But what is my mind constructing that keeps attracting these things? And there, right at that point, most people close the video, because that question is not comfortable. That question implies responsibility of a kind that cannot be delegated. Not to society, not to family, not to the past, not to bad luck. Not in a way that negates real pain or erases real injustices, but in a way that adds something much harder to handle than victimization, agency. The possibility that you can do something. The possibility that you could have already done it before. The possibility that the cage had a door from the beginning and that the door was open. That is what the fourth curtain hides. And if you have made it this far, if you are still here after this, I want you to know it is not a coincidence. This video did not appear on your screen by chance. It is not just another distraction that the algorithm throws at you to keep you busy. There was something, a force, a synchronicity, the silent movement of something bigger than daily logic that brought you to this exact minute. And if what you have just heard has moved something inside you, if you recognize in these words something you already knew but no one had said out loud to you, that too is a sign. You, who have made it this far when others left after 3 minutes, who keep listening because something inside you recognizes this conversation as necessary, you are not the type of person who consumes content for entertainment. You are the type of person who searches, and those who search deserve something real. If this video has stirred you, subscribe and leave a like, not as a favor to me, but as a signal you give to your own unconscious that you are ready to see more. The bell is not a button, it is a thread you keep open between yourself and what comes next, and the algorithm will cut it if you don't activate it first. And if there is someone in your life who has been feeling for years that something doesn't fit, that there is more than what they have been taught, it is no coincidence that this video reached you first. You are the bridge. Share it, because there is someone on the other side waiting for this sign without knowing it exists. What is hinted at on this channel is completely stripped bare in my closed circle, without algorithm filters, without softening the edges, without the half-truths that the public format demands. The link is in the description. Only those who are ready for the uncensored version enter. And we continue. We lift the fifth curtain, the penultimate one. And here, things get especially dark, with that kind of darkness that, paradoxically, ends up being the most illuminating. We have established that the mind constructs the world you see, but there is something the mind does with that capacity that goes far beyond simple perception. The mind creates time, not in the physical sense of time, that is another debate for another day, but in the experiential sense, the way you live time, the density of the past, the weight of the future, the presence or absence of the present, all of that is an active construction that your mind is performing at every moment. And here comes the part that has black humor if you look at it from the right angle. Most people live, on average, between 70 and 80% of their conscious time in places that do not exist. The past does not exist. It is no longer there. What you call the past is actually a reconstruction. Your mind manufactures every time you visit it, and that reconstruction is never identical to what happened. It is an edit, an interpretation, a story you have told so many times that you no longer know where the fact ends and the narrative begins. The future does not exist either. It is a projection, a more or less anxious imagination of what could or should or is going to happen. Both places, the past and the future, are mental constructions that you inhabit as if they were real, while the only moment where something can truly change, the present, passes unnoticed, unexplored, emptied of presence by the constant occupation of non-places. And the funny thing, with that laugh that hurts a little in the throat, is that we live terrified of wasting time. We set alarms, we make lists, we optimize, and all that time we try so desperately not to waste, we have already wasted before we even start because we were not in it. We were in yesterday's review or tomorrow's forecast, which are the same place with a different name. The place where nothing real happens, but where anxiety has all the space in the world to grow. Time is one of the most elaborate constructions of the human mind, and the relationship you have with time says everything about how your mind works in its deepest layers. If you live anchored in the past, there is something there that has not been resolved, something the mind cannot let go of, because letting go would imply dying to a version of yourself that on some level you still need. If you live projected into the future, there is something in the present that is too uncomfortable to inhabit, something you look at sideways but not head-on. And the empty present, that space between the weight of yesterday and the anxiety of tomorrow, is exactly where what you are looking for resides. Not in the past you already built, not in the future you imagine, in the only instant that cannot be edited because it is happening now. But the mind is afraid of the now. The now has no narrative. It has no story to tell or projection to make. It is simply what it is, and what it is does not always turn out to be comfortable to sustain without the anesthetic of the story. We come to the sixth curtain, the last one, the one behind all the others. We have lifted the curtain of thoughts you do not control, the one of the architecture that limits the possible, the one of the currents that come from the lineage, the one of reality as a construction, the one of time as an inhabited fiction. And now, behind all of that, what is there? There is a question that the metaphysical tradition of all cultures, without exception, from the oldest to the most recent, has formulated in different ways, but always pointing to the same vertigo. Who is observing all of this? Because there is a curious thing that happens when you sit in silence for long enough and observe your thoughts instead of following them. When you look at them from the outside, or from the inside but from a different position, when instead of being the thought, you become the one who sees it pass, you begin to notice something disconcerting. There is an observer, something that is not the thought, something that is not the voice that criticizes, nor the one that fears, nor the one that narrates, something prior to all of that. A silence behind the noise, a space in which everything happens but which in itself does not happen. Traditions have called it 1,000 ways. Pure consciousness, the witness, the nameless self, the flame that does not go out, the eye that cannot see itself, but sees everything. You can use whatever name you want or use none at all. The interesting thing is not the name, but the experience, which is this. There is something in you that is none of your stories, none of your fears, none of your achievements or your failures, none of your identities. Something that was there before you learned your name, and that will be there when all those layers have finished falling away. And that something, that presence that observes, is not controlled by the mind. On the contrary, the mind depends on it to exist. It is the stage where the theater takes place. And the great revelation, the one that makes everything else change its meaning, is that you can learn to live from there. Not from the voice that judges, not from inherited fear, not from the narrative of the past, from the silent observer who is not afraid of anything because it cannot be destroyed by any of the things the mind fears. This is not a vague spiritual concept. It is the most concrete and practical difference that exists between a reactive life and a sovereign life, between living as an effect and living as a cause, between being pushed by currents and knowing that you can choose where to swim. The mind controls everything, yes, but who controls the mind? That is the question that changes the game. Not the one who tames it with willpower, not the one who silences it with military discipline, but the one who learns to see from beyond it, who becomes the space in which the mind occurs instead of being the puppet that the mind moves. And the most subversive thing about all this, what makes this idea uncomfortable for systems that prefer reactive and predictable people, is that this observer cannot be bought. It cannot be conditioned with the same ease as surface thoughts. It does not react to the same hooks that move the ordinary mind. Fear, shame, the desire for approval, the need to belong, all those mechanisms that work perfectly to control someone who lives identified with their surface mind lose much of their power when the person begins to operate from a deeper layer. That is why this conversation is not everywhere. That is why it is not part of the standard curriculum of any educational system. That is why real psychological and metaphysical depth remains, to a large extent, knowledge that circulates along the margins, that is transmitted in a low voice, that reaches whoever it reaches in ways that do not always have a linear explanation. Like this one. There is something I want you to do right now, before this video ends. It is not a complicated exercise. It does not require anything special. It only requires you to pause the playback for a moment, close your eyes for 30 seconds, and ask yourself this single question without trying to answer it. Who is reading these thoughts? Don't answer it. Don't analyze it. Just hold the question as if it were a strange object you found in your pocket without knowing where it came from. Let it be there, and observe what happens in the silence that appears around it. That is all. That is already the beginning of the journey. Because the journey from A to B that I promised at the beginning is not a journey from ignorance to knowledge. It is not a journey from confusion to clarity. It is a journey from identification to observation, from being the voice to listening to the voice, from being the character in the theater to knowing that you are also the stage, from believing you are your thoughts to discovering you are what thinks them. And that journey does not end here. Here, we are only beginning to see how many curtains there are. Now I am going to speak to you directly, and I want you to listen to this with all the attention you have left, because what I am going to say is not about this video. It is about you, about that pattern you have been repeating for years without knowing why, about that tiredness of acting like who you are supposed to be while something inside you keeps waiting for you to finally dare to be who you are, about that suspicion, the one that doesn't disappear even if you ignore it, that there is a level of existence you haven't reached yet, but that you feel belongs to you. That is not an illusion. It is a calling. What you have heard today is only the door. There are rooms behind this door that the format of a public video cannot contain, because the algorithm has its own walls and its own limits, just like the ordinary mind. But I have a space without those walls, a closed circle where what is hinted at here is spoken without filters, without softening the edges, without the half-truths that public speaking requires, where the topics we touched upon today are taken to the very bottom, without asking permission from any system. Entering there is not following me. It is crossing the threshold. It is marking a before and after on your own map. If you have been telling yourself for years that someday you will take this search seriously, that day is not next month. It is today. The link is in the description, and crossing that door is not a subscription. It is an act of loyalty to yourself that the coming weeks will prove to you was not in vain. Because in a short time you will not be the same person who started this video. You will begin to see things you couldn't see before. You will stop tolerating what you still tolerate today. And what you feel right now, that mixture of discomfort and recognition, is exactly the sign that something is moving in the right direction. Every like you leave on this video is a lit candle in the algorithm, a signal that brings this content to someone who needs it at this moment and doesn't yet know it exists. Every comment you write below is a public declaration, small but real, that you are no longer satisfied with the surface version of things. Sharing this is breaking a chain of silence, because there is someone in your environment, maybe someone very close, who has been alone for a long time among sleeping people and who still doesn't know this conversation exists. You know it. You are the bridge, and if you activate the bell, what comes next will arrive without the algorithm filtering or burying it. But there is more. The unconscious registers symbolic acts. This magic is not a metaphor. In the next 48 hours, if you pay attention, something will move. A coincidence that does not fit into the ordinary, an unexpected conversation, a door that opens without you having knocked. Those who are on the side of the awake will recognize that sign. The others will call it chance and stay asleep. You already know which side you are on. The theater still stands. The curtains are still there, waiting. But now you know they are curtains. And that difference, apparently small, changes absolutely everything. Because whoever knows they live in a theater can finally decide if they want to stay in the seat or go up on stage. The show is not over. We have just reached the intermission.